Good evening, good evening to you, you. Good evening to you, you. Good evening, Dr. Yvette. Good to see you. Good evening, good evening. Won't you share with a friend or two? Good evening to you. You. Good evening to you. You. Good evening, good evening, good evening to you. Welcome to Daring Dialogues. I'm your host tonight, Shantae Charles. I hope that you have been having a great and wonderful day. I want to say thank you to those of you who have been listening, and thank you to the replay viewers who will catch this at a later time. Tonight, we are focusing solely on our book, What is the Civil Rights Movement? I realized in reading last night that we have quite a bit to finish up. So I do want to read about 3 to 4 chapters tonight, and then I will open it up for conversation around the civil rights movement, and we'll be able to have a good discussion tonight, hopefully. And I'm probably going to read tonight about 15 to 20 minutes straight, and then I will open it up for conversation because I do not have to end early because I don't have any adults to teach tonight. So we do have a little bit more leeway tonight as far as our discussion time. So again, we have been reading from What is the Civil Rights Movement? And I really like this series because it simplifies things, but it also keeps the facts together and gives you a lot of good information, things where if you want to explore a name, you'll have some names tonight. If you want to look at certain movements, you'll be able to look those up. And you want to add to your own knowledge, you can expand it from what we read tonight. Just like on last night, we began to talk about Emmett Till and also the Club from Nowhere and Georgia Gilmore, and how she was able to use the skills she already had as a cook to be a financial and economic powerhouse behind the scenes during the civil rights movement. So Georgia Gilmore is someone that I'm going to be posting about on my Facebook page, Historical African American Images, to give people a little bit more insight into what I find about her. So tonight we're going to be reading about the lunch counter sit-ins. And then from there, we're going to talk about the SNCC rules of nonviolence. Then we're going to move into talking tonight about the Freedom Riders and also the Children's Crusade, or also known as the Birmingham Children's March. We're going to talk a little bit about freedom songs and the importance and power of freedom songs. And then we're going to end with the March on Washington. So that's where I hope to get tonight. I know that's quite a bit, and I am ambitious, and I think that we're going to be able to get there. So here we go. The lunch counter sit-ins. The Montgomery bus boycott was a nonviolent protest. Many civil rights protesters first learned about nonviolence from Dr. King, and he was following the beliefs of an activist in India named Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhi said, "When violence appears to do good, the good is only temporary. The evil it does is permanent." Now, if you've studied Mahatma Gandhi, what you will find out in studying him, as I did, is that Mahatma Gandhi took his teachings from Christ. And upon learning and reading about Christ, Mahatma Gandhi said that the love that Christ was demonstrating was the essence of nonviolence. So When people say the nonviolent movement, just put the word love in there because that is exactly what he was talking about. And which is why King could take Gandhi's philosophy of nonviolence because it aligned with his own spiritual belief system. On February 1st, 1960, another kind of peaceful protest began. It too changed the way Black people were treated in America. It started with four friends who were students at an all-Black college in Greensboro, North Carolina. A lot of interesting things have come out of Greensboro, by the way. They stood up for their rights by sitting down. Their local Woolworth store had a whites-only lunch counter. Joseph McNeil was one of the students who started the protest. He said, "To face this kind of experience and not challenge it meant we were part of the problem." That Monday afternoon, the four friends each purchased something in the store. Then they took seats at the lunch counter. "I'm sorry, we don't serve colored here," the white waitress told them. McNeil and his friends had been inspired by Dr. King's sermons on nonviolent protest. They politely showed the waitress and the diner's manager receipts for what they'd bought. Some white patrons cursed at them, some encouraged them. The four men feared for their lives, but they held fast. They were not served that day, but they were not arrested either. They didn't go home until the store closed. Word of their protest traveled, and the young men became known as the Greensboro Four. You can actually look them up and find more of their story. Their sit-in launched a new era of student involvement in the civil rights movement. The next day, more students joined the Greensboro Four at Woolworth. The following day, over 60 students filled most of the seats in the diner. By the end of the week, hundreds of Black and sympathetic white students crowded into lunch counters across the city. The action was compared to the Boston Tea Party that helped start the American Revolution. The Greensboro Coffee Party lasted 6 months and ended in victory. Woolworth desegregated its diners. At last, Joseph McNeil was able to sit down at the counter and eat a slice of apple pie. Greensboro was one of the first cities where sit-ins took place, but it wasn't the last. Young people around the country decided to have sit-ins in their own towns. One of those people was a college student in Nashville, Tennessee. His name was John Lewis. Along with fellow student Diane Nash and activist James Lawson, he helped form the Nashville Student Movement. And this is a rendering from the Greensboro Four that turned into the Greensboro Coffee Party. And here is a rendering of John Lewis as a young man. On February 13th, 1960, John and the others led hundreds of Black and white students in sit-ins around Nashville. They were refused service at every lunch counter. White managers turned off the lights and closed the diners around them. The students sat in the dark until the end of the day. After a few days of sit-ins, the police threatened to arrest the students. Angry white people beat and insulted them. Dr. King liked the young people's energy. He invited them to join his group, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. But the students thought that the SCLC was too old-fashioned. Instead, they started their own group. It was called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also known as SNCC for short. SNCC came up with a plan they called Jail, No Bail. They got arrested and they filled up the jails until the police couldn't arrest any more people. Then SNCC marched to City Hall. The mayor of Nashville was waiting on the steps. He was afraid the sit-ins would lead to violence. Diane Nash asked him, "Do you recommend that lunch counters be desegregated?" The mayor replied, yes. SNCC had succeeded in just 3 months. The group was a new force in the civil rights movement, one that would play a big part in future protests. Somebody say, hail to the college kids. So here are the SNCC rules of nonviolence. Before the first sit-in, John Lewis wrote up a list of nonviolent do's and don'ts to follow. As MLK would say, organize, baby, organize. Strategize, baby, strategize. So, here were his do nots. Number one, do not strike back nor curse if abused. Now, how many people would fail that first rule? Just think about that. How many people would fail it? Rule number two, do not laugh out. Do not hold conversations with the floor walkers. Do not leave your seat until your leader has given you permission to do so. Do not block entrances to stores outside nor the aisles inside. Do show yourself friendly and courteous at all times. Do sit straight and always face the counter. Do report all serious incidents to your leader. Do refer information seekers to your leader in a polite manner. Do remember the teachings of Jesus Christ, Mahatma Gandhi, and Martin Luther King. Love and nonviolence is the way. May God bless each of you. For all the people who like to just exclude Christ out of the picture of getting things done, these people didn't exclude him. Selah. On to Freedom Riders. On May 4th, 1961, a group of black and white students boarded buses for a new kind of protest called the Freedom Rides. The rides were organized by the Congress of Racial Equality, or CORE. There had been many complaints from black people who'd been blocked from using the bathrooms at bus stations across the South. The law said restrooms on national highways were for everyone. CORE teamed up with SNCC and the SCLC. They planned to ride 2 buses from Washington, D.C. to New Orleans, Louisiana, to draw attention to the problem. John Lewis of SNCC was one of the 13 original Freedom Riders. In South Carolina, he got off the bus and attempted to enter the white waiting room. A group of white youths in leather jackets blocked his way. After he told them it was against the law to stop him, they beat him up. Only after John was on his knees did the police tell the white men to go home. John got back on the bus and kept riding. The farther south the 2 buses went, the more dangerous it became. In Alabama, the police allowed a mob to attack the buses. 1 bus was set on fire. The riders escaped and went to the hospital, but the mob tried to burn it down too. The bus drivers refused to go any farther. The first Freedom Ride was over, but there were more to come. And may the tenacious arise. On May 17th, a group of 10 Freedom Riders rode south on a bus escorted by state police. They made it to Montgomery, Alabama, where the local police were supposed to protect them. Instead, the riders were attacked by a violent mob. Even then, the riders would not turn around. As one white Freedom Rider remembered, the black guys and girls were singing. They were so spirited and so unafraid. They were really prepared to risk their lives. Which leads us to another important aspect of the civil rights movement, the freedom songs. Singing played a big part in the civil rights movement. Traditional black spirituals and hymns sung by protesters were known as freedom songs. Now, I have created an entire album of freedom songs. It's called Do Love Walk. And one day when I am no longer on this plane, somebody will still be singing those songs. So do your part in whatever you're supposed to be creating in this hour. Just a little plug. One song became the anthem of the movement. We Shall Overcome started as a work song used by enslaved people in the South. They would work the fields while singing, I'll Be All Right Someday. In 1901, a minister changed the words to I'll Overcome Someday. In 1945, striking South Carolina tobacco workers turned the word into We Will Overcome. 2 of those workers introduced it to activists and musicians, including Zilphia Horton and Pete Seeger. They changed the lyrics to the way the song is sung today. I sang it with many different nationality groups, and it's so simple, and the idea is so sincere. This is an image of Zilphia Horton, who changed it to the version that we have today. What is your freedom song? They continued on to Mississippi. Mississippi was the most dangerous state in the South for civil rights protesters. There, they were arrested for disturbing the peace. They sang freedom songs and refused to eat. The riders stayed in jail for several weeks, but the protests continued. Over the next 7 months, more than 400 freedom riders rode buses south. In the end, the U.S. government agreed to enforce the law. Whites-only signs came down at interstate rest stops and bus stations across the South. Once again, nonviolent protest had made a difference. Now, the Children's Crusade. Bombingham was the terrible nickname for Birmingham, Alabama. The Klan regularly bombed the homes and churches of black citizens there. Dr. King would later call it the most segregated city in the United States, but that did not stop black people from demanding their civil rights. On the morning of May 2nd, 1963, thousands of children ages 6 to 18 marched from the 16th Street Baptist Church into downtown Birmingham. They wanted to end segregation, not just in Birmingham, but across the nation. They called the march the Children's Crusade. A crusade is a fight for a cause that people believe in. I was told not to participate, Jessie Shepard recalled, but I was tired of the injustice. She was 16 at the time. Many parents were afraid for their children's safety. The city's commissioner for public safety was a white man named Bull Connor. At earlier civil rights protests in Birmingham, he'd had the police turn powerful fire hoses and brutal police dogs on the marchers. But all of those protesters had been grown-ups. Dr. King and other civil rights leaders believed that not even somebody as evil and wicked as Bull Connor would harm kids, but they were wrong. On the first day of the march, more than 1,000 children were arrested. The youngest of them was only 9 years old. They were jailed for as long as a week or more. But the next day, more students marched. They carried protest signs and sang freedom songs. Less than 2 blocks from the church, Bull Connor's men were waiting. Out came the fire hoses. 16-year-old Arnetta Streeter recalled that she had clung to a friend and the water just washed the two of us right down the street. But she was one of the lucky ones. I don't think I will ever forget that water. And when you would run, they had dogs waiting. I thank the Lord that they didn't put the dogs on me, she said 50 years later. So this would be some of you all's grandparents that experienced this. That would have been a part of the Children's March. Other children were bitten, beaten, and bruised. Some parents fought back to protect them. The news cameras caught it all for viewers at home. People sent bail money to free the children from jail. The White House urged the city of Birmingham to negotiate with Dr. King. So, when we talk about what is happening in other countries, when we say pray for the Ukraine, let us not forget our own legacies of brutality that some leaders are taking their cue from, and why some leaders, I won't mention no names, see us as a very hypocritical nation. And just leave that there. In the end, Birmingham agreed to desegregate public areas. Black people could now also work in downtown stores. But Dr. King called it the most magnificent victory for justice we've seen in the Deep South. The Klan held its own protest. A mass rally of Klansmen gathered in white hoods and robes. They burned large wooden crosses and threatened to kill Dr. King. They bombed his brother's house and the hotel where SCLC organizers and reporters often stayed. Violence broke out across the city. President Kennedy sent federal troops to keep the peace, but Dr. King told him more had to be done for civil rights. Because again, the spirit of January 6th can be traced all the way back. Live on TV. The civil rights movement grew because of television. It grew because of the technology of its day. In 1957, 2/3 of all homes in the United States had a TV set. When the Little Rock Nine walked into school that first day, TV viewers were watching. They could hear the shouted insults. They could see the hatred and violence. For the first time, many white Americans saw what life was like for Black people. The leaders of the civil rights movement immediately understood the power of television. In fact, they began to plan on it. As Dr. King later said, "We are here to say to the white men that we will no longer let them use clubs on us in the dark corners. We're going to make them do it in the glaring light of television." That glaring light shocked many Americans. It also convinced many of them to join the push for equality. Unfortunately, much like the 8-minute and 46-second video of George Floyd has done for our generation, television did for King's generation. On June 11, 1963, President Kennedy spoke on television to the American people. He said, "This nation, for all its hopes and all its boasts, will not be fully free until all its citizens are free." He asked Congress to outlaw discrimination nationwide, but change was still slow to come. And finally, the March on Washington. By 1963, there was a clear divide in the civil rights movement. One side moved carefully while the other wanted immediate change. A political group called the Nation of Islam supported the idea of Black nationalism. That meant creating a separate country for Black people inside of the United States. One of the leaders of the movement was a man who was named Malcolm X. He had been born Malcolm Little. Little was the name given to his enslaved ancestors by white men, and he changed his last name to X to protest against slavery. Eventually, Malcolm X stopped believing in the Nation of Islam. He never stopped believing in Black nationalism. He began practicing the Islamic religion. He changed his name to El Hajj Malik El Shabazz and began to favor more peaceful methods for gaining equality. Unfortunately, the Nation of Islam did not agree with his new ideas, and he was killed by members of that group in 1965. Now, the people, as we know now, who were convicted of his death have actually been exonerated. Malcolm X once famously said, "We want freedom by any means necessary." This idea went against the nonviolent practices of Dr. King and groups like SNCC. Several civil rights groups joined together for a big protest to prove that nonviolence worked. They would go to the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., and demand equality. They called it the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Organizers were determined to hold a peaceful event with both Black and white marchers. This meant getting permits, buses, food, and bathrooms for 100,000 people. The march started at the Washington Monument and ended at the Lincoln Memorial. There would be music from famous singers, and the leaders of the civil rights movement would speak on the memorial steps. On August 28th, trains, buses, and carpools arrived from all across the country. One person had traveled 700 miles to the march on roller skates. The crowd swelled from 100,000 expected marchers to 250,000, more than twice the expected number. It was a hot day. People dangled their feet in the pool between the two memorials. They sang songs and listened to speeches. Near the end of the day, Dr. King spoke some of the most famous words ever heard. His "I Have a Dream" speech was carried to the listeners at the march and to TVs and radios around the world. That phrase was sparked by Mahalia Jackson shouting out, "Tell him about the dream, Martin." "I have a dream," he said, "that my four little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." He shared his belief that freedom would ring across the nation. All Americans would stand hand in hand and shout, "Free at last." The March on Washington was a great success, but for white supremacists, it was cause for violence. In Birmingham, that meant the deaths of four innocent children. On a peaceful Sunday morning at the all-black 16th Street Baptist Church, four girls were in the basement getting ready for choir practice. I heard something that sounded at first a little like thunder, and then this terrible noise and the windows came crashing in, one churchgoer later recalled. But it wasn't thunder, it was a bomb. The four choir girls were killed instantly by the blast. Addie Mae Collins, Carol Robertson, and Cynthia Wesley were 14 years old. Denise McNair was 11. People took to the streets to protest their deaths. Support for the civil rights movement grew. The time for change had come, but the South would not budge. Lawmakers fought for 5 long months. At last, more than a year after President Kennedy had called for an end to discrimination, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 became law. It said the country would no longer allow discrimination on the basis of race, sex, religion, color, or national origin. Now, this is the law, but the enforcement of it still seems to be a problem. Next time, on Monday, we will cover what happened during Freedom Summer, which became the basis of the movie Mississippi Burning. We'll also talk about the march, the Selma March on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. We'll talk about changing times and the Black Panthers and the phrase Black Power. And then we'll talk about Martin's assassination and where it left the movement. I hope you have enjoyed tonight's reading on the civil rights movement. If you would like to respond to any parts of the message on tonight, any parts of the reading, and give your thoughts or insights, you can feel free to hit the camera on IG and I'll bring you in for discussion. If you are listening by Anchor FM, I want to thank you for your time and attention tonight. And I hope that you will join us on Monday for the conclusion of what is the civil rights movement. Take care and be well. All right, so I'll give it just a moment here. Anyone who would like to come in and join me for a discussion. Lots to cover. Good evening.
Good evening. You know, there's a recurring theme.
Mm-hmm.
White violence.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's all over the place, but yet it's us. And it's always been us.
And I think, and I want to add to what you just said, because it really is, I want to say, Black progress is consistently met with white violence.
With white violence, yes. Yes.
That's what history tells us. That I forget who said it, but they said power concedes nothing. Power concedes nothing without, I forget the last word, but it's a quote. It's basically saying nothing's going to be just given to you. And Dr. Yvette said, I wonder if Malcolm's idea would work today. Dr. Yvette, expound upon that. What part of Malcolm's idea? Because I think in a lot of ways, his ideas are still ongoing. I think in a lot of ways, his ideas are still ongoing. What we do know about Malcolm is that
Mm-hmm.
through Coretta strategizing, he and Malcolm, I mean, he and Martin were more alike than they were different.
Yes,
And so
they were.
the two times I believe that they did meet, I believe that scared the establishment at that time so much
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
shortly after that Malcolm was assassinated. I think it was like a week or 2 weeks after his meeting with King, he was assassinated.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
so,
And let's add to that the fact that Martin Luther King was trying to get himself a handgun.
well, he already had several. Oh, the Black
Yeah.
National Community. Um, yeah, those ideas are still, they're still going, from my understanding. Like the organization he started is still around. The organization that Garvey started for Black nationalism is still around. The question is, what has happened to Black people's investment in it? Because the
Mm-hmm.
organizations are still there. But where is our collective mind around it? Because there's a faction of Black people that say we don't want to we don't want to connect with the other Black nations of the world. There's actually a group of Black people that say that. Then there's a group of Black people that are still like, give us our own independent nation within this nation, kind of like allow us to declare our sovereignty the same way that the Native Americans declared their sovereignty. So then what would that mean for us? Because in allowing them to declare their sovereignty like that, right? They took the majority of their lands
Mm-hmm.
and relegated them to reservations. So we would have to think about what would that look like for Black America.
But
Can
this was the thing, though.
mm-hmm,
This was the thing, though. They did that, but they made it work.
mm-hmm,
And once they started making it work so good that they started seeing the revenue flowing through there, oh, we want to tax y'all. We want to do this, but no, here it is, right here. You can't do that.
mm-hmm.
You can't touch us. This is our land. See, they wanted to switch. Oh man, they're coming up. But see, the exact same thing would happen with us because we've done it. We have done it in history. We have done it. We have taken nothing and built towns, and they couldn't deal with it, so they burnt them down or flooded them out.
Yeah, put them
So
underwater. You're right.
yeah, so it's there, and they know it. They know what we're capable of if they leave us alone, and they don't want that. I mean,
They
that's the bottom line.
they don't want to leave us. They don't want to leave us to ourselves, but then they don't want us to be with them.
Right.
So
You see the mental. Whoa.
and I'm not
I mean,
saying
that's
and to be clear, I'm not saying all white people. I'm just saying entirely too
no
many of them.
right. Not all white people, but entirely too many of them. And you pointed out something. You pointed out something about the history when you were talking about what was like 90% of blacks came together and got some changes done.
Mm-hmm.
And right here, and me and you've been talking about 80%. If 80% of us can come together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Imagine that. They had 90%.
Yeah.
We're only looking for 80%, and that's hard to get.
And so now we have to say what has disjointed the collective mind, right, of Black liberation, Black empowerment. What has disjointed our collective consciousness that this needs to happen from the end of the 1960s to now? What has played a part in fracturing, because what I call it is, or what I see is, it's a fracturing of the mental collective consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
There was a mental collective consciousness that we as a people needed to overcome, that now when you talk to a lot of Black people, it is, I shall overcome, and good luck to the rest of y'all.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Um.
we got to deal with that. Go ahead, Pastor.
Well, I remember a few years ago, the president of South Africa, he was calling for all Black people, free nation, to unite. He was calling for that, and I think a couple of years later, it's when George Floyd was murdered, and we did unite for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
After that, for a minute.
For a minute. Mm-hmm.
And now we're separated again. I think part of the problem is the inclusion for a few. See, the inclusion for a few
Mm-hmm.
kind of mess, because back then there was no inclusion at all.
So you're
Basically,
saying,
but now-
the strategy is, if I can let a few of you in and give
Mhm.
you enough privileges,
Mhm.
but also utilize you kind of like as the veil or the front men to say,
Mhm.
we are letting people in, you should be satisfied with who we're letting in.
Right. Exactly. And not only that, let's put this another way with something we studied. Okay. How did they get the slaves off the ship?
Oh yeah.
A well-dressed Black man.
Mm-hmm.
See, a well-dressed Black man standing there waiting on.
And they're thinking, oh, we see somebody who looks like us. They seem to be
Mhm.
well dressed, and everything is going to be okay. I know we've had a rough trip over, but everything seems to be okay. Well, I mean, clearly this Black person would tell us that
Right.
something's wrong because they look like us.
Right, 'cause
They
he
would
looks
tell
like
us.
Mhm.
But instead of warning them, they would actually take them through a dark tunnel and lead them up to the light. And when they got up to the light, it was the auction block.
Yes.
Talk about a bait and switch, if I ever heard of one. That was absolutely crazy. You know, to read about a Black person who was freed, that they would send to the docks to greet the enslaved getting off the ships. And they would use that Black person to lead them further into land. And they would be so unassuming, thinking that this person was leading them to a better place, but they were actually leading them up to the block to be sold. That's some whole other level kind of wickedness.
Yeah.
That you could even be a Black person doing that.
Mhm.
But again, we have modern day examples of people who are sort of doing the same things.
Mhm.
Dr. Yvette said, agreed, inclusion for the few, tokenism. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. It's inclusion for the few. And so if I am a part of the token citizenry and they give me something in exchange for me holding that space between them, the person who gave me the privilege, we call it Black privilege, and everybody else who doesn't have, and I continue to get my privileges by telling the people in front of me who have no privilege that you should be satisfied with where you are, or giving you a false hope and making it appear as if I'm in the movement to get you free, but I have no intentions of moving. Now that's what I see. I see a lot of people who are pretending to be in the movement, but they have no intentions of getting the rest of Black America free.
Right.
Because
I think
because they're comfortable with where they are, which is pretending to be part of the movement.
Queen keep freezing. I think that was one of the biggest problems that they had with Kaepernick.
Mm-hmm.
He's making plenty of money in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
See, but he took a stand. And see, that defied their narrative. See, it went completely against their false narrative.
Yeah.
See, and
I mean, if he would have just,
even today are saying,
if he would have just agreed to stop kneeling and just throw the ball, he still have a job.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So, I've even had people recently, because of Flores, what's going on with them, saying that, well, black people make plenty of money in the NFL. I say that's because they're better than the white people. It wasn't given to them. They were not given a position. If they remember the history of football, just like baseball, they were not given anything. They had to come in and work harder and prove that they belonged. And it just so happened that they were so good that, hey, they outdid the white folks, outdid the counterparts. That's why they're in the NFL. If the NFL could have survived without them, don't you think they would have?
Yeah, I mean, as they said, the coaching is the last bastion. So, so if you take the coaching, well, in terms of like below ownership,
right? Below ownership, yeah, that's coaching.
And I don't know, are some of the owners former coaches? Like, was that a stepping stone? I'm not sure. I'm just asking. I'm wondering if some of the owners were former coaches at some point.
Now, that's a good question. I'm gonna have to research that. That is a good question.
And I'm wondering if that is the link.
I think there have been though.
I'm wondering if that is the link between why they're holding that gate, because that might be like the gateway into becoming an owner.
And then I'm thinking, because if I remember correctly, back in the day, there were some coaches that did become part owners of teams. Matter of fact, I think John Elway is part owner of the Denver Broncos right now. I know he has a front office job, but I think he's part owner.
I'm typing in NFL owners who were coaches, and let me see. Has there ever been?
Elway wasn't a coach. Elway wasn't a coach. He was a player.
Has there ever been an owner coach in NFL history? And this says yes. One of the most famous owner coaches was George Halas, who started then coaching the Chicago Bears. George Halas, Papa Bear, founded the Chicago Bears.
Okay, that's a person came to my mind too, George Halas.
So yeah, an owner can be a coach, but I wanted to really know if the current owners have ever been coaches, and I don't really see that. But an owner can be a coach. So that just opens up a little bit more conversation around that and why they might be so hesitant to fill the field with black coaches.
Yeah, you know what? I had one guy, because there was a statement made, and then I made a statement considering the situation, because they keep saying that Flores took money, and I corrected that. I said he was offered money.
Right.
He didn't take the money. That's what the problem is.
Right.
He didn't take the money.
I mean, but there was a whole, I think there was a whole article about the whole gambling system of the NFL. It came out a couple of years back.
Yeah.
And I've been telling people this for quite a while because
it happens.
Yeah.
Anybody that's paying any type of attention, they know that it happens.
Right.
It's just a matter of proving it. And what I know what the other thing was, it was about the paper that they wanted him to sign. Yes, that paper was drawn up when he signed his contract. But that stays there until he's released. Now, once he's released, they want him to sign that. Until, that's a hush agreement. We pay you your money, and you're going to get that money because you're signing this agreement to hush. See, and I spoke on that. This guy come to me and he says the fact that none of this have been proven, or all the facts have not been put together, shows just the type of person you are. And I said, the fact that you pointed out what I said and not the person that I responded to shows even more the type of person that you are.
Yeah. It's a lot in terms of all of this. Like, Dr. Yvette, you're welcome. You asked a very good question. You know, what
Yes.
will it take to actually get us back on track as a collective? There's pockets, yes. There are pockets
Right.
of black
Get a
people
pocket.
who are connected, who have a vision to do something, who are getting it done. But how do we get all these little pockets together? During the civil rights movement, they had the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. That was the old black male spiritual leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Then they had CORE. Then they had SNCC, which was the college students.
Mm-hmm.
So there were separate organizations happening, but they were working together. They started working together to get stuff done.
Well, see, part of the problem right now is about being popular.
Yeah. Likes and
I'm
follows.
going to be popular, and that's what I want. Now, y'all got to do y'all popular thing on y'all own. Y'all can't take none of mine, none of this over here. I need to do this by myself. I need to head this up and be the only person noticed over here. So whatever y'all want to do, y'all got to do it on your own. I'm going to do what I got to do. If y'all want to help, y'all can help. But, that's the way that's got to be. And again, separation, division. See, and that's what's happened to, quote unquote, the church. Division.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
See, so, that strategy is great. Divide and conquer. That's the oldest strategy that there is.
Man.
And we keep falling for it.
Yeah, we seem to keep falling for it. But I have faith. I have
Me too.
faith that the generations coming behind us.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, the generations coming behind us. Oh, the generations coming behind us. That's why so many of them,
They got questions.
not just the questions, but that's why so many of them are walking away from what they've known
Mm-hmm.
into the unknown. And when I say that, they're not walking away from God. They're walking away from systems that have made a mockery of God, systems that have abused people and refused to be held accountable. That's what they're walking away from. They're walking away from leadership that refuses to see everyone as valuable. That's what they're walking away from.
Listen, my niece and her husband were a couple that did that. Now he got his own podcast. It's called Straight Talk with Trevor. And I was on there once. He invited ministers to come on, and no one would come on. No one would take the challenge because he comes at you. He do. Now he's a believer, but he don't play. He comes at you. So I posted something on Facebook, and he said, "Uncle Ben, you got to come. You got to come." So I came, and he came at me, but I responded. He said, "Man, you answering all the questions." I said, "Listen, I studied." I said, "And I also hear the Holy Spirit."
Listen, if you ever want to be in the hot seat, I think you watched my hot seat point.
Mm-hmm.
You want to be in the hot seat? Go teach some Hebrew Israelites.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Between half of them saying, "I don't listen to women," to she aight. I'm like, well, I'm so glad that your mind is open to know that God can speak through women now. I appreciate that. Much love, brother. Much love. Much love. Peace and power. Peace and power. But yeah, people just want the truth with
Mm-hmm.
no chaser.
Mm-hmm.
This is why, if you notice, when we teach on Sundays, I don't spend a whole hour singing. You want to hear me sing? Just go to YouTube and type in my name. There's hundreds of videos of me doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I'm,
and you got CDs.
I mean, I'm here to actually teach, and because now we know that the time span of people's attention has gone from an hour. I'm really pressing it if I go an hour. Has gone from an hour to about 30 minutes. For
Mm-hmm.
some people, it's 15. For some people, it's 7 seconds. Literally. I recently just saw an article where TikTok, people are now complaining that TikTok is allowing 7-second videos to get more time or to get more exposure in the space than even the 15-second videos. And the reason why is because they're trying to give people that dopamine hit that social media gives you. They're trying to
Mm-hmm.
give it to them quicker. And I know some people disagree with this gentleman who I'm about to name, but he said something very powerful the other day. He said, the way that our society is moving, you're going to need to learn how to have a word in 60 seconds. You're going to need to learn how to deliver the truth in 180 characters. Your sermon might have to be a Twitter thread because that is the way that, unfortunately, technology is shaping people's attention. And
Mm-hmm.
because people are not consciously aware of how their brain is changing to only receive information in these really quick snippets, you're going to have to start pairing your messages to match how people can receive the truth. Doesn't mean that you stop teaching the truth. It means that you got to be quicker in your delivery, and you have to be very succinct in your delivery. And you may have to do it in segments as
Right.
opposed to one lengthy sit down. So,
Mm-hmm.
that's something that we're all going to have to adjust to. If you notice, I've been trying to do our segments now in about 30 minutes because I realize people's time, their attention span is shortened. It really is. Final thoughts, Pastor Ben. Final thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Well, I keep coming back to this. We need to wake up.
Mm-hmm.
We need to wake up. We, as black people in the United States, we need to wake up. Wake up from the brainwashing.
Yeah.
Understand what this country is. We'll disagree with you 100% because I said the same thing. We're critical.
Mm-hmm.
And the person that you didn't name, I know exactly who you're talking about. People are hypocritical. They're hypocritical. Together.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
I think you're pausing. You're going in and out a little bit. There you go.
What I was saying is that we need to wake up, to 80% and come together and get some stuff done. Yeah.
Agreed. And so, just like with those organizations in the past, everybody was not like matched up 100% on everything or how they were doing it, but they
Mm-hmm.
understood that they had a common enemy, and that enemy was discrimination. That
Mm-hmm.
enemy was enslavement. That enemy was oppression. That
Mm-hmm.
enemy was imminent danger and in danger of genocidal extinction.
Mm-hmm. And
Like
all that is
they,
still going on.
right, like they were very clear that if there are no more of us, there's not going to be an argument or discussion in the future about which one of us is right. If none of us is here,
Right.
the first primary focus should be preservation of black life.
Mm-hmm.
That's the goal. That's the common thread. And when King and Malcolm realized they both had a common thread, preservation of black
Mm-hmm.
life, they were able to meet. And in that meeting, people around them said, this is dangerous, because now they understand that the thread is preservation of black life.
Yep. Yep. And had they gotten together and worked together,
Because as long as we can keep Negroes arguing about everything else but preservation of black life,
mm-hmm.
they will continue to be separated. And we won't really have to do much outer violence, because we see that they're still fragmented in the consciousness of what needs to be preserved, which is black life. And
Mm-hmm.
then comes Black Lives Matter. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Female-led organization
Mm-hmm.
with the thread.
Mm-hmm.
So what are they going to attack? Oh, they're attacking it because it's women-led. They're attacking the sexual orientation of some of the women that's leading.
Mm-hmm.
What does that have to do with Black Lives Matter?
Absolutely nothing.
So my thing is, we have a generation that's coming behind us that get it.
Mm-hmm.
The preservation
Yeah.
of black life. That is the thread. That's the thread that's supposed to be running through the goal, which would be preservation of black life for all. Preservation of all black life.
Mm-hmm.
Please tell me the last time you've seen on national TV white people fighting against each other over the things that are labeled underneath their whiteness. Tell me last time you seen it. Why? Because they understand. I may not get along with you, or I may not think that you're doing your faith right as a Catholic or a Baptist or a
Mm-hmm.
Pentecostal. I may not necessarily agree with your sexual orientation practices,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm gonna defend your right to be white.
Mm-hmm.
Black people, we still
All day
haven't gotten
long.
that yet.
But see, part of our problem, and let me say this and I'm done, I hope. But part of our problem is that we defend your right to be white and forget about our right to be black.
Woo, child. See, that's gonna take me on a whole other hour.
See,
Oh my. So, yeah. I told people, I said, when y'all get these presidential results back, y'all gonna find out that they understand the common thread.
Mm-hmm.
And the common thread is you protect whiteness above every other categorizing,
Right.
every other categorization, you protect whiteness above that.
Mm-hmm.
And so until black people wake up and understand, the common thread is protect black life. That's the common thread. We can argue about the other stuff later. But
Mm-hmm.
what is the number one priority and what is the imminent threat? The imminent threat is extinction of black life.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not about protecting black life, what conversation do we have?
None.
If everything you're planning is a destruction of black life, what agreement can we come to? So hopefully we'll get it together in this decade, Pastor Ben. That's what I'm believing.
Yeah, me too.
Sooner than later. I would like it to be before 2030. We kind of need it to be
Mm-hmm.
before 2030. Like
Mm-hmm.
2024 would be great. 2023 would be even better.
Mm-hmm.
But we definitely need to get it
Yeah.
together before 2030. So thank you, Pastor Ben, for this conversation. I appreciate you. This has
You're
been
welcome.
another episode of Daring Dialogues, and I've been your host tonight, Shantae Charles. Remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness. So go out and be what, Pastor Ben?
Light.
Be light. Take care and be well.